federal judges who were impeached and removed back in the 1980s. No other federal judge had been impeached or removed since. Even if Kent had sexually assaulted an employee, I wondered, how could we possibly confirm that? It was a classic he said, she said situation. Kent certainly wasn't going to talk, and McBroom seemed to have vanished. Rice and I began making cold calls and knocking on doors, but McBroom and all federal court employees in Galveston and Houston, where McBroom had been transferred, had been ordered not to speak. Sources said that McBroom had made a formal complaint and that a top-secret judicial misconduct investigation was underway. Very slowly, one source led to another, though most people we contacted were nervous and willing to speak only off the record. Over the months of Houston's long, hot summer, I accumulated a stack of Spiral reporters' notebooks filled with stories about Kent, a man who displayed a photo on his wall in chambers of himself clasping hands with President George H.W. Bush. Kent had been handed a lifetime appointment by Bush, who still lived part-time in Houston with his wife Barbara. Many powerful and politically connected Houstonians admired Kent for his intellect and for his wit. But I found attorneys and former employees, male and female, who feared or even hated Kent. Their stories painted an increasingly detailed portrait of abuse of power. Since I couldn't reach McBroom, I began tracking down other women with strange and shocking stories. Along the way, I unearthed other troubling information about why federal judges who had begun to investigate McBroom's complaint instead seemed to be covering up Kent's misbehavior and ordering others to stay silent. For the first time, I learned about a top-secret federal judicial disciplinary system that allows judges nationwide to privately review complaints against their peers. That system seemed designed to protect the reputations of federal judges, rather than to provide essential information to the public about judicial rogues. In the summer of 2007, all of my online address searches for McBroom ended at the Clear Lake house that she no longer shared with her husband and son. It appeared that her marriage had begun to crumble under the stress. Then, in late August, a new address popped up, a Houston condo where McBroom had recently re-registered an SUV. Harvey Rice and I were wearing our IDs as newspaper reporters around our necks when we knocked on the door, figuring we might have just seconds to engage with McBroom. McBroom opened the door and looked right at me. Her eyes were crystalline blue. Rice had met McBroom before, in court, but we introduced ourselves anyway. "I can't talk," she immediately said. I rushed to try to create a channel of communication. "If you were sexually assaulted, I promise you we would not use your name without your permission. But if we do a story about your complaint, you deserve to decide whether you are named or not. Is there any way for us to stay in touch?" For professional and personal reasons, I felt strongly that sexual assault victims should have some control over their own stories, though in those days I told few people about my own experiences. McBroom retreated into the shadows of the entryway. She seemed isolated and alone. "Please," I said, "I've already talked to others who say Kent touched or propositioned them." Then, purely on impulse, I added, "I know what it's like to be sexually assaulted. And if Kent did something like that to you, he should not get away with it. Not even if he is a federal judge." McBroom hesitated, but before shutting the door, she accepted our business cards and supplied an attorney's name. It would take years before she could finally grant an interview, but for me, this brief encounter would be the beginning of more than a decade of slowly getting to know her story. In the 2000s, McBroom was one of the only women in the United States who was publicly raising allegations about sexual harassment and sexual misconduct by a federal judge. In 2006, an activist from New York, Tarana Burke, suggested that women should band together to combat pervasive stories.